All right, so we've got a really interesting deep dive ahead of us today.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of questions from you all out there about building applications that can handle a ton of growth.
Right.
And using .NET and Azure to do it.
Of course. Yeah.
So basically, we're talking about scalability here.
Big time.
And I think everyone listening probably has at least a basic idea of what that means.
Yeah, for sure.
But you know what's cool about this deep dive is that we're going to take it a step further.
Absolutely.
We're going to kind of distill all this information down into like the essential actionable insights.
Yeah.
Best practices. So you can actually build .NET apps on Azure that can just handle, massive growth without, having to wade through
all a bunch of
right? Yeah, all the complexity.
Overwhelming detail.
Right, exactly. Because you want your app to be able to like adapt and perform really well no matter what.
Exactly.
Like whether you've got like just a handful of users or if you suddenly have this huge surge.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I guess like right off the bat, the question is, why is this ability to scale so fundamental for applications today? I mean,
well,
it seems kind of obvious, but I think it's worth.
It is. I mean, think about it. If your application isn't built to scale and you suddenly have a ton of growth,
right?
Like say a marketing campaign takes off or something,
yeah,
users are going to run into all sorts of problems, right?
Of course.
Slow loading times errors, maybe even like the whole thing crashes.
Yeah, for sure.
Scalability is really all about making sure that every user has a good experience.
All right.
No matter how much demand there is. And that's where Azure comes in because it gives you this really elastic environment.
Okay. So
where your application can just grow and shrink.
So Azure provides like the infrastructure, the foundation.
Okay.
But then what are like the key principles that we need to keep in mind to build applications that can actually scale?
Yeah. Well, there are a ton of detailed strategies out there, but I think some of the core ideas are, designing your system so that different parts can operate and scale independently.
Okay.
So it's kind of like having a well-organized team.
Right.
Where one department's workload doesn't end up crippling the whole organization.
Gotcha.
And then another really important thing is to keep things stateless.
Okay. So
that individual components can handle requests more efficiently.
So basically just like modular and self-contained.
Yeah, exactly.
So Azure obviously has a whole bunch of different services.
It does.
For .NET developers, so specifically for scalability.
Right.
So what are like the must-know tools?
Well, if you're talking about hosting web applications, Azure App Service is a really good place to start.
Okay.
It's got built-in auto-scaling.
Nice.
And it can actually adjust the number of instances automatically.
Okay.
Based on things like CPU usage or how long the request queue is.
Wow. So it just like...
It does it all for you.
Takes care of it.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
And then there's Azure Functions, which is like the serverless option.
Okay.
And because it's event-driven, it only uses computing resources when it's actually triggered.
Right.
And it can scale automatically to handle like huge bursts of activity.
So serverless sounds like it's kind of ideal for unpredictable workloads.
It is.
So what about the data behind all of these scalable applications? I mean...
Well, for relational data, Azure SQL Database has a bunch of different tiers.
Okay.
Including one called Hyperscale.
Okay.
Which can handle these really massive and rapidly growing databases.
Wow.
What's really cool about it is that it can scale up compute resources really quickly.
Okay.
And without any significant downtime.
So no interruptions.
Right.
That's huge.
And then if you're working with NoSQL, Azure Cosmos DB is designed for global scale and high availability.
Okay.
So it's got this thing called multi-master replication.
Okay.
Which lets you write data in any region with really low latency.
So that's perfect for like globally distributed applications.
Absolutely.
So we've got options for relational data, non-relational data.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure that all these different components can communicate?
Right. That's a great question.
And integrate smoothly.
Yeah. And that's where services like Azure Service Bus and Azure Event Grid come in.
Okay.
So Service Bus provides this really reliable and ordered message queuing system.
Okay.
Which basically means that critical tasks will get processed even if parts of your system are down for a bit.
Gotcha.
And then Event Grid lets you build these event-driven architectures where different services can react to events almost instantly.
Right.
And they can do it in this really decoupled way.
Okay.
It's pretty amazing how these services make it so much easier to build these resilient and responsive distributed systems in .NET on Azure.
Yeah, they make it sound almost easy.
Right.
Almost.
Almost.
Now, the sources that we've been looking at, they mention a bunch of real-world examples
They do.
of why scalability is so vital. But they don't really give specifics.
Right.
So, like, what kind of scenarios would you say really highlight the importance of this?
Well, I mean, think about Black Friday for like e-commerce websites.
Right.
Or the launch day of a really popular game.
Right.
Or even like news websites during some major event.
When everybody wants to know what's going on.
Exactly. In those situations, the traffic can just spike dramatically in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, for sure.
And without scalability, those applications will probably just crash.
Yeah, totally.
Leading to all sorts of problems.
Lost revenue.
Yeah, frustrated users, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. So we've been talking about building for today's growth.
Right.
But how do we make sure that these applications stay scalable?
Yeah, that's a great question.
In the future.
Yeah.
As things change and evolve.
Yeah. I mean, one thing you can do is adopt architectural patterns like microservices.
Okay.
Which lets you scale and update individual parts of your application without affecting everything else.
Okay.
And then, of course, you always want to stay up to date with the latest Azure services.
Right.
Because they're always adding new features and improvements.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of a crucial question to ask yourself, though.
Yeah, what's that?
Which parts of your application are you expecting to see the most growth in the coming years?
That is a really good question. Okay, so just to quickly recap.
Yeah.
We've talked about why scalability is essential.
Right.
We've gone over some fundamental design principles, and we've looked at a bunch of Azure services that are really useful for .NET developers.
Absolutely.
App service functions, SQL database.
Yep.
Cosmos DB service bus and event grid.
Exactly. All the building blocks you need to create .NET applications on Azure.
Right.
They can handle whatever you throw at them.
So before we wrap up,
yeah,
I want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
Think about your current projects or maybe upcoming projects.
Right.
Which of these Azure services that we've talked about today do you think Playmer could have like the most immediate impact?
Yeah.
In terms of building and scalability?
Good question.
I think that's something that's definitely worth exploring.
It is.
To figure out, what's going to give you the biggest advantage right now.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.